The wind screamed across the desolate mountain range, a sound that cut through the stone and into the bones of the 12 men huddled against the cold. It was a moonless night, the kind that special operations forces prayed for and their enemies feared. The team moved in a practiced, silent formation, their night vision goggles painting the world in shades of ghostly green. At the front of the formation, moving with a predator's grace, was Captain Jack Malroy. To his men, he was more than a commander. He was a legend, a fortress. For a decade, he had been the steady hand in the chaos of the world's most hostile places, earning a reputation that was spoken of in whispers in the hallways of the Pentagon and with reverence in the SEAL teams. He was the man who could read a battle space like a chessboard, always 3 moves ahead of the enemy. By his side, as she had been for the last 5 years on countless black ops, was Kaylin Valkyrie Vance. She moved with an economy of motion that was terrifying and beautiful to behold. Her eyes, visible through her scope, never stopped moving, constantly scanning, assessing, processing threats before they even fully materialized. No one knew her real age, and no one dared to ask. In a world dominated by sheer physical power, Kaylin was a different kind of force. She was a ghost with a rifle, capable of hitting a target the size of a coin from a mile away, and in wind conditions that would make a ballistics computer weep. Her record was immaculate, with over 60 confirmed kills, each one a story of its own. The official reports called her a tactical asset, but the men who fought beside her knew her as the angel on their shoulder. They trusted her with their lives without a second thought. Their target was a high-value terrorist leader, a man named al-Bashir, who was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers and civilians. But he was rumored to be hiding in a fortified cave complex, a natural fortress that had been wired with explosives and manned by a force of over 100 hardened fighters. The mission was simple in concept, but suicidal in execution. Insert via halo, high-altitude low-opening jump, scale the mountain, breach the complex, and eliminate the target before the enemy even knew they were there. The jump was flawless. The 12 men and 1 woman fell silently through the freezing air, in their chutes opening like dark blossoms against the stars. They landed on a narrow plateau, the wind whipping snow into their faces. For 2 days they climbed, navigating sheer rock faces and crevasses that could swallow a man whole. Kaylin, with her light frame and incredible endurance, was often the first to reach a new ledge, anchoring ropes and providing cover for the others. She and Jack worked in perfect sync. A glance, a hand signal, and a slight tilt of the head, that was all the communication they needed. The bond between them went beyond rank or camaraderie. It was forged in the crucible of shared danger, a deep-seated trust that was more profound than words. Jack often said that having Kaylin on his 6 was like having a guardian angel with a high-powered rifle. He was the only one who knew her real name, the only one she ever told about the farm in Montana she hoped to buy someday. On the 3rd night, they reached their objective. The entrance to the cave was a dark maw in the side of the mountain, flanked by machine gun nests. Jack gave the signal. The assault was a symphony of controlled violence. Suppressed rifles coughed, and the sentries dropped without a sound. The team flowed into the cave like dark water, clearing room by room. Kaylin found a high vantage point just inside the entrance, her scope tracking the team's progress, eliminating threats that appeared from the shadows. But the firefight was intense and brutal. The enemy, though surprised, was fanatical and fought back with desperate fury. The narrow corridors of the cave amplified the thunder of gunfire into a deafening roar. Jack was a whirlwind of violence, his movements fluid and precise. He took down 3 fighters in a matter of seconds, his rifle empty, transitioning to his sidearm without missing a beat. They pushed deeper into the complex, the air thick with the smell of cordite and blood. And they found al-Bashir in a central chamber, surrounded by his personal guard. The firefight that ensued was the fiercest of the operation. For a moment, It seemed they would succeed. Jack had al-Bashir in his sights. But in that split second, the world exploded. The enemy, realizing their leader was lost, had triggered a massive hidden IED. The blast was apocalyptic. The walls of the cave shuddered, and a wave of concussive force and shrapnel tore through the chamber. Jack was at the epicenter. Then the explosion lifted him off his feet and threw him against the stone wall like a rag doll. Kaylin, from her perch, saw it happen. She saw his body go limp. She saw the blood. She screamed his name into the comms, but there was only static. The blast had caused a secondary cave-in, separating her from the main team. Rocks and debris rained down, and in the chaos and smoke, the order came from the second-in-command, a man named Becker. "Fall back! The captain is down! We have to move now! The whole mountain is about to come down!" Kaylin fought against the current of her own men, trying to push forward to get to him. She saw his still form through a haze of dust, his body crumpled and unmoving. A SEAL grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Valkyrie, he's gone! There's nothing you can do!" With a final agonizing look, she was dragged away, her heart shattering into a million pieces as the mountain collapsed behind them, sealing Jack Malroy in a tomb of rock. But the extraction was a blur of pain and grief. Back at the forward operating base, the reality set in. The news hit the naval community like a thunderbolt. Captain Jack Malroy, the indomitable, the legend, was dead. Becker, now the senior surviving officer, filed his report. He painted a picture of a heroic last stand, of Jack single-handedly holding off the enemy while his team extracted a final, selfless act of sacrifice. The narrative was clean. It was heroic. It was a lie. Yet the official report, signed and sealed, listed Jack as KIA, body not recovered. A memorial service was held, a solemn ceremony where tearful eyes saluted a folded flag. The SEAL unit mourned their captain and tried to move on. But Kaylin Vance didn't attend the service. She sat alone in her quarters, staring at a wall, replaying those final seconds in her mind. Something was wrong. She saw him fall, yes, but she didn't see him die. The medics later said no one could have survived that blast. The engineers said the cave-in was total. The team needed to believe their leader was gone. They needed closure, but Kaylin couldn't find it. She requested the drone footage from the operation, a request that was immediately denied. She asked to speak to the intelligence officers who had analyzed the aftermath and was told the case was closed. The more she was stonewalled, the more a small, stubborn ember of doubt grew into a raging fire in her gut. She knew Jack Malroy. She knew his resilience, his will to live. If anyone could find a pocket of air in that hell, it was him. The official narrative felt too neat, too easy, and in her experience, the truth was never neat or easy. She handed in her resignation, a move that shocked the entire community. They called it grief, a breakdown. They whispered that the Valkyrie had finally lost her nerve. She let them talk. She let them believe it. And because the truth was far simpler and far more dangerous. She was going to find him. The next 6 months were a descent into a world that didn't exist on any map. Using every contact, every favor, and every last cent of her savings, Kaylin built her own intelligence network. She contacted old assets, paid off local informants, and poured over satellite imagery that cost a fortune on the black market. She learned Pashto, the local language, not just the words, but the nuances, are the tribal inflections. She grew out her hair, learned to wear the local clothes, and studied the customs so she could move through the villages without drawing a stare. Her mission was a secret obsession, a silent war fought in the shadows of bureaucracy. She learned that the mountain where Jack fell was in a region controlled by a warlord who was now an ally of convenience to the U.S., meaning no one was going to risk the diplomatic fallout to search for one dead SEAL. And the official search had been called off after 2 weeks. "Too dangerous," they said. "No signs of life," they said. Kalen knew that was bullshit. They hadn't looked. They were afraid of the optics, of the political nightmare of sending a rescue team into the territory of a nominal ally. So she decided to go alone. It was madness. A single woman, even one with her skills, infiltrating a hostile tribal region to find a man everyone believed was dead. But the madness was fueled by a love and a loyalty that the Pentagon couldn't quantify and the politicians couldn't understand. She packed a light bag, a compact sniper rifle that broke down into a suitcase, a sidearm, medical supplies, water purification tablets, high-energy rations, and a small encrypted satellite phone. She crossed the border on foot, using smuggling routes known only to the most desperate. The mountain was a silent monument to violence. It took her 3 days to reach the area, moving only at night, hiding in caves and under rock outcroppings during the day. When she finally stood before the collapsed cave entrance, her heart sank. It was an immense pile of rubble, a chaotic jumble of rock that looked like it had been there for centuries. Hope, which had flickered so brightly in her chest, now guttered like a candle in a storm. She began to search, methodically, painstakingly. She looked for any sign of disturbance, and any clue that a man had been there. On the second day, she found it. Hidden behind a large boulder, partially obscured by dust and debris, was a small, faint marking on the rock. It was a symbol, a trident, scratched into the stone with what looked like a knife. It was the sealed trident, and next to it, a crude arrow pointing down and to the left. Her breath caught in her throat. It was his signature. He had been alive. He had left a message. With renewed, frantic energy, she followed the arrow. And it led her to a narrow fissure in the rock, hidden from view by a recent rock slide. It was a natural chimney, a crack that led deep into the mountain. It was a gamble. It could be a dead end. It could be an animal's den. It could be his grave. She didn't care. She squeezed into the fissure, her body scraping against the sharp rock. The passage was dark, cold, and claustrophobic. She crawled for what felt like hours, the weight of the mountain pressing down on her. The air grew thin and stale. Just as despair began to creep back in, the passage opened up. She tumbled out into a small natural cavern, and there, in the dim light of her headlamp, she saw him. He was huddled against the far wall, a ghost of the man she remembered. His face was gaunt, covered in a thick beard, and etched with lines of unimaginable pain and suffering. His uniform was in tatters, revealing bandages made from torn cloth that were filthy and stained. One leg was bent at a wrong angle, it clearly broken and poorly set. He was so still, so pale, that for a terrifying moment she thought she was too late. Then his eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused at first, then they locked onto hers. He blinked, once, twice, as if he was seeing a mirage, a final cruel hallucination conjured by a dying mind. "Kay?" The word was a dry, rasping whisper, barely audible. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She rushed to his side, dropping to her knees, and her hands gently cupping his face. "I'm here, Jack. I'm here." A single, silent tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He was alive. By some miracle, the explosion had blown him into this natural pocket, a void in the rock that had absorbed the brunt of the blast and provided him with a small pocket of air from the fissure. He had been trapped for 6 months, surviving on the meager water that seeped through the rocks and the few emergency rations in his belt kit, and which he had rationed with a discipline that bordered on superhuman. He had set his own broken leg. He had fought off despair, madness, and the crushing loneliness. He had survived not just on willpower, but on the belief that she would come. He knew she would come. Getting him out was a nightmare that tested Kalen's skills to their absolute limit. He was too weak to walk, too heavy to carry far. She had to jury-rig a harness and pulley system using her climbing rope and carabiners. is slowly and painfully hauling him up the narrow chimney, inch by agonizing inch. It took them a day and a half to get out of the mountain. Twice, they almost fell. Once, Jack blacked out from the pain. But Kaylin never stopped. She was his engine, his will, his lifeline. When they finally emerged into the thin mountain air, under a sky full of stars, they both wept. The journey back to civilization was another epic of endurance. Kaylin, though exhausted, became his protector, his hunter, and his nurse. She found food, kept them hidden from patrols, and treated his wounds with the limited supplies she had. Jack, for his part, leaned on her, drawing strength from her presence. They moved like shadows, a ghost and his savior. They didn't dare use the satellite phone, fearing the signal could be tracked. They had to make it to the border on their own. After 2 more weeks of hellish travel, they stumbled into a small, remote village in a neighboring friendly country. Kaylin, using her carefully crafted local identity, found a man with a truck who was willing to take them to the city for a wad of American dollars. From there, she made a single encrypted call. Not to the Navy, not to the Pentagon, but to a man she trusted, a retired intelligence officer who owed her his life. He arranged for a private plane and a team of doctors to meet them at a remote airstrip. When Jack Malroy, barely recognizable, was helped off that plane, but the world was about to shift on its axis. Kaylin, standing by his side, her arm around his waist, supporting him, was a picture of fierce, unwavering loyalty. The news broke like a thunderclap. The dead captain was alive. The story Becker had so carefully constructed began to crumble. The initial reaction from the Navy was shock, followed by disbelief, and then a frantic, bureaucratic scramble. There were immediate questions. How did he survive? Why wasn't a proper search conducted? What the hell happened on that mountain? For Becker and the men who had left him, it was a waking nightmare. Their heroic narrative was exposed as a lie, a story built on the assumption of death. They were not villains, perhaps, but men who had made a choice in the fog of war, a choice that now haunted them. Jack was rushed to a top-secret military hospital. The official story was rewritten, carefully. They couldn't admit they'd left a man behind. And so they framed it as a miraculous survival and a daring recovery by a loyal associate. They never used Kaylin's name. They never gave her credit. In their reports, she was simply a civilian contractor. The day Jack was deemed strong enough to receive visitors, the hospital room was a fortress. Security was tight. The first person through the door was a 2-star admiral, followed by a team of stone-faced officers. They wanted a debriefing. They wanted to know everything. Jack, sitting up in bed, looking thin but with fire back in his eyes, gave them nothing. He told them the facts of his survival. He told them about the cave, the water, the rationing. But when they asked about his recovery, he simply said, "An old friend found me." He refused to elaborate. After the admirals left, another visitor was announced. It was Becker. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of conflict, relief, guilt, fear. He walked to Jack's bedside, his eyes downcast. "Captain, Jack, I don't know what to say. We thought... The report said..." Jack looked at him for a long, silent moment. The room was thick with tension. The man who had left him to die was standing before him. Jack's voice, when it came, was quiet, but hard as steel. "I know what the report said, Becker." Becker flinched. We had to make a call. The mountain was coming down. There was no way..." Jack held up a weak hand, silencing him. "You did what you thought was right. I'm not your judge." He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "But you left a man behind. You have to live with that, not me." Becker's face crumpled. He nodded, unable to speak, and backed out of the room, a broken man. Later that evening, When the official visitors had gone and the hospital settled into its nighttime quiet, a figure slipped past the security. The guards, for some reason, didn't see her, or maybe they chose not to. Nicaelan Vance stood in the doorway of Jack's room. He was awake, staring out the window at the city lights. He turned his head as she entered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There were no words for what they had been through, for the bond that tied them. She walked to his bedside. He reached out and took her hand, his grip still weak, but unmistakably his. "They're going to throw a parade for me," he said, his voice rough. "Medals, speeches. They'll call me a hero." She squeezed his hand. "You are a hero." He shook his head, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that burned. "No. I'm a man who survived. The hero is the one who refused to let me die, the one who walked into hell alone because she knew I was there." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I told you once I'd find you that farm in Montana." A tear slipped down Kaylin's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I remember." Jack managed a small, tired smile. "I think it's time we went looking for it. Together." She leaned down, resting her forehead against his. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, surrounded by the machinery of the military that had failed him, they found their peace. The SEAL unit thought their captain was dead. They were wrong. He was just waiting for the one person who knew that legends don't die so easily. And when the renowned female marksman returned to his side, she proved that the strongest weapon in any arsenal isn't a gun, a bomb, or a satellite. It's an unwavering heart,